All right, this week we're going to be talking about what it means to be Christ's people, what it means to be a family in the church. Really, as soon as people rejected God, he was working on how to save us. So he did it by stages, and one of those stages was to create the Jewish people out of the people that were there at the time, to call them the chosen, to take them sort of apart from the rest of the people in the world that were all fighting amongst themselves and everything else. And then use them, form them, and made their life better, and then Jesus came from that. So, and then he calls us to kind of the next stage, which is to become the people of God, being brothers and sisters of Jesus. So this is actually one of my favorite scriptures. It's from 1 Peter. It's a great letter. You were ransomed from your ancestors' futile way of life. And I've got the definition here because it's not a word that people use a lot, I suppose. But ineffective. There's no purpose to it. And this doesn't mean your ancestors like your own personal family, like your parents, grandparents, and all that. Although in my case, that works really well because my folks on both sides of my family did not really live great lives. I mean, it was a mess. And so I can really say I was saved from my ancestors' futile way of life. But so the idea is just that humanity was not going on its own, was not going in a good direction. We had cut ourselves off from God, tried to do things the way we wanted, to put ourselves at the center of the universe instead of putting God at the center of our lives. We're going to talk more about that later. Ransom from your ancestors' futile way of life, not with money that doesn't last, but with the precious blood of Christ. Only God could save us. And he was there from before the creation of the universe because he was involved in it, although before the creation of time is kind of a funny thing that we'll talk about some other time too. Anyway, but this is the thing is there has to be that sense that it isn't just a matter of being saved from your own sins, my own sins, although that's true for a lot of us. Some of us have had more problems than others. So for us, we have a real sense of God saving us. For other people, some of you have been, really pretty good people your whole life. And you look at it and go, well, what am I being saved from? Because I'm already pretty cool. But it's the idea of what humanity's been, and that weighs heavily on us as we grow older, that a lot of the problems in the world start to hit us harder the older we get, because we're just more into it. When you start working and stuff, you really realize how pointless some things are. Or you, in faith, do really well. And I don't mean certainly don't mean making a lot of money necessarily, but that there is a way to work that is very, very joyful if we do it in the faith. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's move on to the next one. So most of you were probably baptized as children, but as I've shared with you at the beginning, I was baptized when I was 11. It was my choice. So we're not really born into being Catholic, although you'll hear that all the time. The people say, were you born Catholic or did you come to it later? But in fact, nobody is born being Catholic. We all have to be baptized. But I know it can seem that way because your parents had you baptized when you were a child. Okay, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later too. But right now, what I want to do is kind of look at this whole thing that we're going to be going toward with family and kind of compare and contrast. I hope you get some of that in your essay questions at school. So why do we use water? Why do we have a rite or a ritual? One of my grandchildren just got baptized this last weekend, so that would have been November 7th. And so why do we do it that way? People make fun of this. You pour water over somebody's head. That's a big deal. And the hint here is weddings and babies. So think about how baptism is like weddings and or babies. So why do we have a ritual? Well, a wedding is a ritual. And a wedding publicly starts a new life together. The couple kind of starts it off there. They kind of announce it to everybody in that way. A birth makes a new person public after they've been hidden, inside the mama's belly. And so the idea is these are kind of similar things, that there's something that happens that kind of starts something that's a new kind of life. The wedding, they start off as a married couple. In a birth, the child goes from being inside the mother to being out in the public and really starts beginning to live in a way that will take them all the way to being an adult, hopefully. So I don't know if you know about this, but have you ever heard the saying, that somebody'd say that somebody was pregnant and they were going to have the baby and they were really big, and then it was like, oh, her water broke, and that means that the baby's going to be coming soon? If you didn't already know this, the babies are inside a bag of water, the amniotic sac. It's filled with amniotic fluid, which is mostly water. And that cushions the baby against shock and everything during the pregnancy. Really important. That water usually breaks before or during the beginning of labor. Sometimes the doctor has to break it. But it means that there's still always some left in there. When the baby comes out with this rush of water, and sometimes it's a lot. And it's interesting that God chose water as the sign, because it's like a baby being born. We're born into new life in baptism. We're born into the family of God in baptism in a special way. Born into being the brother or sister of Jesus. And it's done by water, just like a baby comes into the world with getting water all over them, not just poured over their head. The baby actually lives in the water. I could tell you some really interesting stuff about the science in that, because it's absolutely incredible. So there's a lot more to baptism and the water even than that. Just like being born into a family, the water is involved, but water has meant life to people. Now, not just the desert people, but any place you go, you need water. So I do some camping, I do some hiking stuff out in the desert and everything else. And, the rules, there's a thing called the Rules of Three, and you can look that up someplace. But if you're lost and you're going to be out lost for a long time, you got to get water within 3 days. You pretty much need water within 3 days. But you can actually go almost a month without food. You wouldn't think you could, and you'd be pretty miserable. But you can't go without water. Water is so essential for us. We're mostly water. Our body's mostly water. Most of the earth is covered in water. So anyway, the water is used for cleaning too. Baptism is a sign of washing away that futile way of life that we talked about earlier. I mean, we can say, original sin. There's a lot of different ways to say it. But water is just this amazing thing. And if you study chemistry, you'll find out there isn't anything else really like it. It has a lot of really interesting characteristics. So I'm not even going to get into all of it here, because there's so much you could do with water. But there's more. So one of the other things about water is that it's everywhere. Everybody experiences it, and that makes it available. It's a sign that baptism is available to everyone, because that's who God wants. He wants everyone. So God made us with body and soul, body and spirit, however you want to put it. And in Genesis, right at the beginning, Genesis is not about how the world came to be, like from some scientific view. It's there to tell us about our relationship with God from the very beginning. So when God created us, in Genesis it says, and God saw that it was very good. So he made us this way. He's not taking it back. And he deals with us using the physical, familiar things. So water is very physical, very familiar to us. So he wanted baptism to be something that we would experience physically, and it would be a sign of what's going on spiritually. And it works on so many levels. There's so many ways this works. So I hope you'll spend some time thinking about that. Anyway, we're not made to be angels. We're made to be like God, and yet have bodies which God does not have, except for becoming man as Jesus, the Son becoming man. It's the ultimate challenge, because having a body makes it harder in so many ways. And we live in between. We live between heaven and the earth. There's actually some old Greek mythologies. If some of you know Greek mythology, you'll know that there's some stories about this kind of thing, that they kind of had a hint of it, but they didn't see this. They didn't see this coming. But we're in the middle. We're both spirit and flesh. We're in a way between heaven and the animals. And it's just amazing. And it's not like we're part this and part that. we're both things together all at the same time. And it's hard, but it makes it possible for us to do some really amazing things because that's the way that God created us. So the church is a sign in the world. And like the sign of baptism is water, in the church it's supposed to be our love for one another. And that looks like family. It looks like a really healthy family. It looks like a family that I did not grow up with. But the idea, Jesus said, they will know that you're my disciples by your love for one another. And he also said, love one another as I have loved you. He didn't say for us to love some other way, but to love with that perfect love. That is not an easy thing to do. So one other thing we need to remember is that God would be perfectly happy without us. He didn't create us out of need. He created us so that we could be loved and so that we could love. You can't love somebody that doesn't exist, and somebody that doesn't exist can't love. So the creation was a way to make it possible for us to know love. But he had to create us for us to have that. I hope that makes sense. So did he love us first, and that's what created us? Or was it the other way around? Did he give himself to us in creating us? So you can think about that one a little bit. So then the question is, how do we respond to that? How do you respond to somebody that creates you so you can be happy, so you can be loved, and so you can have the experience of loving others? So, okay, we're a family, but we're not going to be living here. I mean, we don't live forever in this present life. We're looking forward to heaven. We're looking forward to the resurrection of the body, and there's a lot of things there. So what is that like? Because if that's what we're meant for, and that's where our future is, and this right here is just kind of a temporary thing, then what is heaven like? So when we think about heaven, when we look at heaven, we look at that, our future in that way. How can we do that when we're stuck in time? And there actually is a way. When we look at heaven, we actually can see it in the world here, and it looks like a particular thing that is pretty interesting. So kind of go with me here on this. This might be a little strange. So if you've ever been in the car and you looked at something in the distance as you're driving along, and you see the thing there, but you're moving along the road. But when you look at that thing that's far away, it doesn't seem to change. It's just kind of still there no matter how many times you look at it. So that's kind of like it is when we look at heaven. Heaven isn't changing, and that's because it's perfect. When things are perfect, they don't need to change anymore, and believe me, it's not going to be boring. But when we do it at different points in our life, when we look at something, it looks like repetition because we're seeing a bit of heaven, and whenever that happens, we are seeing it from a different place in time. So from our point of view, it looks like, oh, this is repeating. What we're not realizing is we're seeing the same thing every time in a way. And clues about this have been put all through creation. God gave us lots and lots of clues about it. It's pretty interesting. So think about repetition a little bit. Sometimes we think it's boring, but believe it or not, repetition gives life. Did you know that if it were always daytime, if there was not a sunrise, night and day and all that, plants wouldn't grow. The photosynthesis, the process where plants convert sun's energy into material and energy, it has a light and a dark reaction. At night, there's things that are going on. One of my daughters, who still remembers this really well from school, did a great job at dinner the other night because she and her family were over, and she was explaining it in really good detail. So if you take biology, you have a pretty good chance that you're going to learn about the light and dark reactions of photosynthesis. Okay, that's a long time. You can look that one up. Also, the seasons every year. The seasons are the same. There's always the same summer, fall, winter, spring every year. And yet, they are different for us each year. Some winters are colder than others. But it's repetition. We eat, hopefully, every day. We do that over and over again. We wake up every day. We say hello to people every day. We don't say to somebody, oh, I said hello to you last week. I'm not going to keep saying hello to you every time I see you. We do that. That's what human beings do. That's a hint of heaven. Did you ever wonder why people pray the rosary and pray the same prayer so many times in a rosary? And many people do it every day. We say the Lord's Prayer every time we say it the same. We say it at every Mass. Hopefully you say it, every day. And of course it's in the rosary several times. We repeat. That's why these things repeat, is because we're looking at heaven, which is perfect and the same. And here, the only way for us to express that is by repetition. So it's a very interesting thing. And you can, and saying grace before meals, there's so many prayers that repeat. And of course, the greatest prayer that repeats is the Mass. Did you know that at any time of day, somewhere in the world, Mass is being said? And as you can see here, and this is an approximate that somebody worked out, there's about 350,000 Masses said per day. That is just a huge amount of prayer going on. So one of the things that's interesting about the Mass is you'll hear some people say, well, Jesus, died, and you're just basically crucifying him all over and over again. When I was young, that was something that people said a lot that didn't approve. But every one of the Masses that you've ever been to, that anybody's ever been to, they are like a portal or a window or a doorway to what in Latin what we call illo tempore, which is that time. It's the time of when Jesus was here, when he suffered, when he died, when he was resurrected. We believe that when we are at Mass, we are there at the foot of the cross. We are there at the Last Supper. We're there with Jesus when he revealed himself resurrected to the apostles. It's all of that. We are there with it, so that wherever we are in time, wherever we are in space, if we're at Mass, we are, in a sense, almost transported in some mystical way to be there. We are looking at eternity. We're looking at God from many different places and times, and we're seeing him, but it feels like repetition because every time we go to Mass, it feels like from our point of view, we did the same thing again. But each time, it's because we're going to the same place. Sometimes it's like, I don't know if you've ever been where there's a train going by and you can see through the windows in the train, you can see to the other side and it kind of flashes. It reminds me like that a little bit. Or like on movie film, the idea that there's all these different pictures, but when you put them all together, it looks like it's moving. But really, each of those pictures is just sitting there fixed. Anyway, something to think about. So going back again to the idea that we're body and soul, there's some animals that can live in the water or on the land, like frogs. And we're kind of like that. We can live both spiritually and physically, but we can be both at the same time. And the closer we are to God, the more these work together well. And when they really work together well, we're able to do the things of earth way better and do the things that are spiritual, like loving. We can do that way better. And our life actually does get easier. And I know there's exceptions to that where there's people that live in horrible countries where Christians are persecuted and they may die. But in the end, they still have great joy. So let's go back to the Mass again. Receiving the Eucharist at Mass, it helps because it's Jesus we receive, and he had it all together. He's fully human with body and soul, and yet one with the Father, and there's no conflict. So when we receive the Eucharist, it takes us to that. It actually works to perfect us and make us able to deal with the problem of being both spiritual and physical animals at the same time, because Jesus already did it successfully. So you have a break. I made this little video a while back that, I don't know, you might find it interesting, but it's about how we can damage that relationship with God, and yet God continues to care for us so much that having any relationship actually helps us a great deal. I hope you enjoy it. I actually wrecked myself climbing rocks about 1.5 years ago, and when I had recovered enough that I could start to go back, to climbing and everything. I went out to the desert and recorded this. So hopefully just, try and pick up from it what you can. This would be a great thing to talk about. If you like it, you can talk about it in the response.
Hi, I'm just hanging out here at some rocks. And just while coming out here, it occurred to me that sometimes we do things that aren't in our best interest. This right here, if we can take this to be faith or our relationship with God, then, okay, it's pretty secure, and I'm totally hanging on it. It's a little sore in the hips, actually, right now. But I'm hanging off of here. But sometimes we decide that we want to leave God alone, and we put a cut in that relationship. And these ropes, like God's love and our relationship, they're hard. They're not so much that they're hard to break, but it doesn't take much to hold on. Look at that. There's hardly any of that left. It's more than halfway through, and it's enough. And I can cut a little more. And it's holding on just by threads. But I'm still alive. It's still keeping me here. And look at that. It's still holding me. But if we keep pushing it, what's going to happen? Ah! And my friends, there's a lesson in that. Could have been 1,000 feet up, but I wasn't. Still makes me nervous. So when we go without prayer, when we stop going to Mass, if you look at this rope is made up of a lot of fibers. Each of those fibers is a little bit like something in the Catholic faith. Some part of our belief. Things about stuff that other people don't consider important. About how sins are forgiven. About how we're supposed to deal with each other. What things are right and wrong. All of that, each of those things is like a fiber in this rope. You can see it's made up of a lot of separate ones. There's a protective sheath around it that's supposed to keep it safe from getting cut. That didn't last long. But even getting down to one little piece sometimes is enough. I've known people that stayed with the faith simply because of the Eucharist. Now, the Eucharist, of course, is a lot more than one thread in a sense, but you get the idea. Sometimes one thing's enough to make us hold on, but when we cut ourselves off completely from God, we fall. And we fall hard. So, take from it what you will, but think about it.
If you really listen, you'll find that sometimes people talk like the church is something else. It's a thing they belong to, but not that they're an integral part of it. Sometimes they act like the priests are the church, or that the Pope, the bishops, and the priests of the church, and the sisters and the brothers. But they forget that we are the church. It's those certain people have certain functions within the church, but they're not something different as far as they're the church in one way and we're the church in another way. We are the church together. And it doesn't work like it does in the world, where there's people that are the big people in charge and nobody else really, is important. So anyway, the point is that when you look at this quote here, it says that the church is the animating principle of human society. Animation is when the pictures move, when they draw the pictures and they move rather than photographing real people. And it implies that movement. It's the thing that gives life. Anima is the spirit. It's the life that's in there. And that for people to get along and live together in peace and harmony and they need to be bound together by love. And the love of God is perfect. So if we're bound together by our love for each other is coming from that love of God, it's going to be a very powerful thing, and it's going to be possible to do things that are really wonderful. So in the book, you'll see where it talks about Jesus as priest, prophet, and king. And do pay special attention to that part and think about how you can live out all of those, because we share in the priesthood of Christ, in the prophetic role of Christ, and we share with Christ as a servant king. It's really important because for me, when I was baptized, that was actually one of the most important things that I saw. It really made an impression on me. So hopefully it does for you too, but take a look at that. So thank you for joining us this week. Take a look at the links that are on those buttons on the page. Do be sure to read the book if you haven't read it yet. Hopefully you already did, so this all made sense. And do feel free to send me questions, suggestions, anything else. Do your response. Share something from this video or anything else that's on this week's page. So look forward to seeing you November 17th for those of you that can make it. We will be safe. We'll be all masked up and keeping distancing and all that kind of stuff. Thank you. Have a great week.